I saw a video the other day, which I'll preface by saying I don't think it's a particularly bad video, but it is a video I think that kind of misses the point. And it was a video by what's this bloody channel called? Reject Modernity or something like that, something of that nature. I'll probably post a bit of a correction somewhere. But he posted this video where he was responding to an old Emma Watson interview, where Emma Watson was talking about the man box. Actually, you know what? Instead of an explanation, because the video's only like a bloody minute long, I'll play the video, we'll come back, and we shall discuss it.
I like to joke about the man box, which is like, you can only be a man if you fulfill these certain qualities and you stay within this square of like, you're in your man box and you're safe in the man box. And something about, for some men, about going near feminism is a step out of the man box.
Because they know it's just so fragile. It's just
gonna
fall apart.
I know, it's gonna fall apart.
They hold that box
identity
together.
structure, definitely. And I really sense that.
So, interesting video, was it not? Where Emma Watson discusses her idea of the man box, our brother here decides to define the man box for her. Shows us the man box is comprised of courage, dedication, perseverance, all that good stuff, right? And while I sat there and watched the video, or at the end of the video, I found myself laughing because it was like, fam, you proved your point. I was like, dude, I don't think you recognized it, but this is kind of exactly what she was talking about here. So Emma Watson certainly didn't articulate herself very well, but after listening to lots of different feminists and listening to the concept of toxic masculinity quite a bit, and listening to liberals scramble to find a way to criticize the toxicity of men, I kind of understand what they're trying to say, even though they themselves can't really articulate it very well. Well, actually, Lindsay Ellis is probably the only person that really has been able to articulate toxic masculinity very well, and I discussed that in a video I made a couple of years ago, actually. I'll post that somewhere in the description box or in the corner so you guys can check that out. But so if I can take a crack at defining toxic masculinity, and so by toxic masculinity talking about the man box that Emma Watson was talking about, she was saying that there is a specific perception of what a man can be, and if that man decides to not be in that specific perception, if that man deviates from that, he is usually mocked, lambasted, or criticized for it. And I say this is certainly true. I think African American males who are a bit more intellectual can absolutely see a lot of this. African American males who definitely decide to not be thugs, gangsters, SoundCloud rappers, certainly understand this very, very, very well. Because those boxes for black people, and if you look in the mainstream media, are very, 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 very specific. If not specific, but very clearly defined. What does it mean to be a black male in a mainstream society? What is the general view or image of black people? It's oftentimes not one of heroicism. It just isn't. It's not one of victory. It's not one of overcoming challenges. It's just not. Although in the history of black people, you could certainly find a lot of that. Mainstreamly, if you look at different television shows, the portrayal of black men it's not one of men doing what's right, being virtuous and doing good. The closest you may get to like superheroism is like Black Lightning, but generally speaking, even if it's not Black Lightning, it's just like being a lawyer or just being a really good cop or just being like a really good main character in anything. It's typically niggas you see at the forefront. It's just how it is. I didn't make it this way. It's just I recognize as a reality. Now, white people, interestingly enough, have a little bit of deviation there when it comes to the internet, which I'll be discussing in its own video. But What I find particularly interesting is the response to Emma Watson's projection, or Emma Watson's commenting on the man box, is for our friend here to prove her point. Because when he looked out for examples of men and masculinity, what he picked was fighters, Conor McGregor, and we'll get to that in just a second. He picked mostly guys doing, mostly strong men, guys lifting really heavy objects. You know, he picked a couple of soldiers. I don't know where they were marching to, but soldiers, I guess infantrymen doing what they do. He picked physically imposing and threatening forms of masculinity. Now, of course, he combined that with the idea that there is perseverance, strength of character, and dedication. Well, dedication, I guess, perseverance are a bit synonymous. But there's a lot of good qualities that comes with the dedication that these men had in order to obtain their physical strength. However, the consistent through line with them all is the fact that, well, they're just physically imposing individuals. Nothing here really talks about the character of being a man. All of that's just kind of projected upon what we see on the screen. Because we could just as honestly quickly say, especially with people like Conor McGregor, that none of his pursuits into stardom really came from anything of virtue or came from him actually wanting to do anything good for the world, but just kind of came from him being a dick. In fact, most of Conor McGregor's showmanship for most of the time he was really popular was just him being a dick. Just him being a right friggin' asshole. I hate Conor McGregor, honestly. I don't really know how he's different. He's crap. He's crappy. He's a crappy person. I don't like Conor McGregor. I never really did. I mean, he's a good fighter sometimes. He's good I mean, there's a lot of good elements in his ability to fight in hand-to-hand combat, I can see. But as far as he goes as a person, the portrayal of the character of Conor McGregor is an asshole. I don't like him. And I think that is kind of what our friend Emma Watson here was trying to commentate on. That when you first think of a man, when you think of the characteristics of being a man, every example that was chosen was just one of physical strength, but never really the application of the physical strength into doing what men do. Because if you look at shows, cartoon shows, the stories that we tell, the stories that we write, even if we go all the way back to Lord of the Rings, strength is always applied to virtue. And I think of my favorite anime show of all time, Yu Yu Hakusho, is a really great showcase into what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be strong? And what are we strong for? I'm sure a lot of people probably wouldn't think that hard about the show Yu Yu Hakusho, but go back and watch it and you'll see. I challenge you, go back and watch Yu Yu Hakusho as an adult now and see how amazing that show is, despite the fact that it was cut short. But Yusuke Urameshi as a character is challenged to be good. He's challenged to use his strength, not for himself, but for the protection of other people. And this is kind of a through line in a lot of shonen anime. A lot of shonen manga is always about strength applied to character, strength doing and fighting for the right reasons. And comic books are very similar, right? Superman. Superman is he is a guy with the best superpowers. And what does he do with it? He just helps people. Now, there's been recent deconstructions of Superman in Injustice and Zack Snyder's nonsense, but for tabling that discussion for another time, Superman, mostly throughout his existence, is just a guy with the best superpowers trying to do what's right with his powers. And then, of course, there's Spider-Man, obviously, and I say this all the time if you preview my channel, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Being strong doesn't mean anything unless you actually accept the responsibility that comes with it. The thing about being strong as a character trait for being a man is that it always does come with trying to do good, trying to do what's right, which is kind of part of the reason why I've always found much disdain with feminism and feminist portrayals and characterizations of men and masculinity. While I can see where they may be coming from on the surface, when I think about the way I was raised, and when I think about my own father, and when I think about the young men who have been around me, I see a lot of men trying to do what's right and trying to do good a lot more than I see men who are selfish and cruel. Don't get me wrong. I see men who are selfish and cruel. I've encountered men who are selfish and cruel. I have encountered evil several different times. I've encountered selfish arrogant bastards a lot. Even I'm kind of arrogant myself, but I'm not a bastard. My parents were married, so. But seriously, I am being serious, but seriously, more to my point, I've seen cruelty in men. I've seen men be strong and abuse their power. I think we've all seen women beaters before, not even just in the TV screen, but even in our personal lives we've encountered them. I've encountered them. I mean, I didn't know at the time when I encountered him, but, you know, I was told later, right? Because, I mean, obviously this stuff isn't, like, men aren't proudly, no, yes, you know, like Shao Kahn, I beat women, you cannot stop me from attacking females. Like, men don't act like that. Evil, cruel men, they don't do that. They don't act like that. And yet, despite the fact that they don't act like that, you know, it kind of brings me to another really good example, actually, because I'm actually a really big fan of Mortal Kombat, and Liu Kang is my favorite character of all time. Did you guys know in the original Mortal Kombat video games, Liu Kang did not have a fatality? Liu Kang did not kill his opponents even if you did the fatalities correctly. I know Mortal Kombat is synonymous with uncensored and gory, bloody violence, but Liu Kang, for a while, before they started giving him fatalities, was a shining beacon of a man doing what's right with his power. Liu Kang, who won the first 4 games before he died in Deadly Alliance, which was really sad. But Liu Kang was a shining beacon through line throughout the series. He was a monk who fought and did what was right. Humble as sin, doing everything he can to protect Earthrealm. That, to me, I find very interestingly enough, is the characterization of men that I find myself, I guess, not only just drawn through, but kind of drawn to, but kind of always put in my face. I understand what Emma Watson is referring to, again, with the man box. You know, mostly because the characterization of men that men get forced into probably isn't something that is forced to them by the media we absorb. I mean, even if you look at characters like, say, Courage the Cowardly Dog, right? Courage, who is a coward. As ironic as the series name implies, if you watch the show, if you remember the show, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Courage fought very hard to keep Muriel safe. Even if he ran away, he always came back. Even if he was spooked, he always came back. He always fought as hard as he could to keep Muriel safe. And not just Muriel, by the way. I mean, he fought to protect anyone that needed protection, despite the fact that he's a small, tiny, pink dog. The interesting thing about it all is that fighting to protect people around us is a theme that I have noticed throughout most of the storytelling in mainstream media for young men, like consistently. Very seldom do you really get a character who just kind of does crappy things. And usually when you get a character that just kind of is crappy for crap's sake, say like Spawn, it's mostly geared or directed towards adults. Like the media we grew up with as young boys we really don't, like, I mean, the closest you get is like Ed, Edd and Eddy, you know, and even then, like Double D, he seems to kind of be the straight man there to Eddie's scams and Ed's stupidity. But even Double D, even if he does participate in the scams, there's always like a limit to it. He always goes only so far, really. The point that I'm making is that even when you find media for young boys where the characters are kind of crappy or shifty, there's still some kind of counterbalance to it. You know, there's still something that stops them from just going to the way of Spawn, or like Kratos was in the God of War trilogy originally. Now, of course, in the next 2 games, Kratos, I mean, it's not a good man, but, you know, I guess he's, you know, I guess. If you guys are familiar with the God of War franchise, Kratos was a Spartan demigod who was kind of awful in a lot of different ways. But even as awful as Kratos was, there was still always some degree of, like, protection, still some kind of heart in him. I'd have to analyze the story a little bit more than in this video to really get into it. But if you play, you guys know. If you don't know, sorry you don't know. You'll just have to wait for me to talk about it some other time. The point that I'm making is that even when you get a male character that is into kind of like doing evil and being a bad guy, the medium is always usually for adult males, right? It's not really for young children, which means that you'd have to go through your childhood first to gain access to God of War or like Infamous or like Mass Effect. Like, to get there, you have to get past, you know, Yu Yu Hakusho. You have to get past Dragon Ball Z. You have to get past, you know, Ben 10. Even in Ben 10, you know, American animation, you'd have to grow up first and get past the media of young men fighting to protect people before you get to the infamous karma system where you can like kill people, or like Shadow the Hedgehog, which I guess Shadow the Hedgehog isn't really adult, but I mean, you know, the evil path does exist in those video games. You know, I'm just kind of mostly thinking of this stuff at the top of my head because like I'm sure you guys as young men or as males can relate to some of this stuff, to some of the media that we grew up with. None of the media that we grow up with really is tailored to the idea of like being men like Conor McGregor, or like being strong men that just lift heavy shit just for competition's sake. Like none of the media, I mean the closest the media could get you to being an infantryman is going into the army to fight to protect people, but like most army men don't have that mindset. I'm not saying none of them do, but most of them is usually that's not really what they go to the army for. Excuse me. You know, the point that I'm making is that in order to get to that point, most young men, I know I was, baked into stories and shows and even books, think of Harry Potter, where men fight to protect people, where men fight to do good. But the man box that Emma Watson is referring to, mostly, if I can just use a colloquial example, she's mostly talking about the performative nature that males need in order to look cool, in order to look good to their peer. Come on. Come. What is the man box? What is she really talking about? What is the performative nature that males need in order to appeal to? That is it other boys? Maybe a little bit of that. But come on, you guys know. Like what is Conor McGregor's showmanship like really, right? Like what is the high octane testosterone, boisterous bravado really for? What are the frat boys? What is the frat gargan nonsense of partying, working out, getting a nice clean aesthetic body? What is that really? What is the end? What is the end for? You know it, and I know it. We all know it. So fine, I'll just say it. The man box is mostly something that's forced, enforced, crafted by women for men. The performative need in order to be confident is the nonsense young men are constantly told they need in order to get women to like them. Being aesthetically pleasing and looking good for women was actually not really something that young men did like in antiquity. It certainly wasn't something young men really did in the medieval period. It wasn't really something that was required of men even back in, say, the 50s or the 60s, really. You know, being or needing to be incredibly aesthetic, interestingly enough, is actually kind of something that's more like developed in the last 20 to 30 years as a requirement for males, you know. And the reason is simple. It's because men aren't pretty things to look at. Men aren't attractive things to look at. Men are oftentimes more codified as tools. Men's greatest accomplishments is the things they do, not the way they look. It's their ability to lead, it's their ability to build, it's their ability to fight. It's men's ability, it's our actions that have always really defined us as men. I mean, Hercules' 12 labors were not how many times can he look good 12 times. It was how many different incredibly powerful creatures could he tame, or could he defeat, or could he face in combat. You know, just using Greek myths, using any myth. I mean, even St. George and the Dragon. Again, St. George's greatest name to fame isn't the fact that he was so handsome and beautiful. It was the fact that he killed a dragon to rescue a princess, right? These stories, I mean, we can use Siegfried, we can use any hero. I mean, it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's just, but the through line is males' history, their legacy is one of action, one of doing. So the performative nature of men that Emma Watson is talking about, you know, she's more commenting upon the frat boys who try their absolute damnedest to not look feminine as to be called gay, or who try their best to not be emotional as to be considered weak. All exists is the most extreme form of courting women. It's just the most extreme form of what women say they like in men. Again, go watch the video I created like a couple of years ago where I talked about toxic masculinity. I go into a lot more detail about it. But the point that I'm making is that while I completely understand our friends' rejection of Emma Watson's, I would say, negative projection on the quote-unquote man box. What he decides to do is kind of prove her point by only picking men just doing strong stuff and another man that is just a bravado-toting asshole. Again, Conor McGregor. He didn't pick fathers loving their children. He didn't pick fathers saving his children. He didn't pick men fighting to do what was right. He just picked men that were just physically imposing and men who were just physically strong. And that's what Emma Watson is talking about. Emma Watson is talking about the fact that there isn't much character in the man box. There isn't much like virtue in the man box. It's just a performance. It's just looking good. It's just puffing out your chest. It's just all these different things that we all instinctually understand because we live in culture. But no one really gets to the meat or the heart of being a man. Because he didn't show us a man that liked to knit. You know, of course, if we saw a man that liked to knit, we probably would think lesser of him. Which is what she's saying. If we saw a man that liked to drink smoothies and lay about on the beach, we'd think less of him. That's what she's saying. If we saw a man who liked to do crocheting, if we saw a man that hung out with a bunch of girls, if we saw a weaker, more effeminate male, we'd think less of him. That's what she's saying. And yet, despite all those different things, a man that likes to knit could be an incredibly seasoned martial artist that is really, really strong. We wouldn't know. You know, a man that likes to crochet, a man that likes to rest and relax, a man who doesn't drink beer, a man who is calm and collected and likes watching My Little Ponies could be incredibly virtuous. He could be incredibly kind and strong and compassionate. We wouldn't know. It's just that we see things that don't really match our immediate perception of masculinity, and we think less of that. That's what Emma Watson is talking about. That's what she is referring to. And I think it's interesting at the fact that as much as we besmirch feminists and feminism, usually, as we should, there is every now and again where they have half of a point. And Emma Watson does have half of a point. Half of a point is that when we see the man box, we think of the performative nature of men and masculinity. Usually it only exists in order to be attractive to women, without actually thinking about the character that comes behind it. Why we're fighting. Why do we need to be strong? Who are we protecting? It's never really none of that when we talk about males and masculinity. It's just men are physically strong, men are really confident, they look really good, and they're really loud and kind of assholes. That's what she's referring to. And so, the point of this video is to say, while Emma Watson is wrong, so much as that, like, this is what masculinity is, she is right in the sense that there is quite a performative nature to it. And the only masculinity that a lot of men are seeing when we get into adulthood or when we deal with people in high school and college are assholes. But a lot of us, we're not really seeing the truth of being a man. The truth of being a man is something that we get raised with when we're younger, something that a lot of us probably just really can't escape. And the truth of being a man is we're strong to help other people. That's what masculinity is. That's where our power comes from. We're people that like to do something. We're people that like to create. We're people who like to protect. We're people who like to build. We are people that like to do. That is being a man. And it's a very important element to being a man that I think a lot of us seem to lose as we get older because we want WAP. And I think the pursuit of WAP really damages a lot of young men. And we'll probably have to talk about that in another video. So with that being said, I actually hope you guys got something out of today's video. And if you did, man, go and click the like button. Shoot. Go and click that subscribe button. Comment in the comment box below. And as always, you guys have yourselves a great day. I'll see you cool cats soon. Adios.